Hello everybody. This is the third podcast in the series entitled Who Rules Over Us? In the first two podcasts, we looked at how our lives are so very heavily dominated by superorganisms, huge beasts that live amongst us, and who influence just about everything that we say, think, and do. These superorganisms are difficult to see, but they are definitely there. Here are some of them. Christianity, communism, America, the legal system, banking, feminism, republicanism, the New York Times, the educational establishment, the military-industrial complex, William Shakespeare. Yep, even William Shakespeare is bigger than William Shakespeare, if you get my drift. And if you don't get my drift, check out the second podcast in this series. In this podcast, I was going to talk about how these superorganisms come into existence and about how they grow. But in order to prevent this podcast from being too long, I have decided to limit this podcast to taking a look at the issue of power, because understanding more about the never-ending quest for power undertaken by humans is a prerequisite to understanding better how it is that superorganisms arise in the first instance, and how they grow. And so, in this podcast, we shall just look at the issue of power, and in the next podcast, we will look at how superorganisms arise and then grow. And the bottom line here is very simple when it comes to the issue of power. All organisms, high or low, big or small, seek to benefit themselves by acquiring power and by using it. Indeed, their very existence testifies to the fact that they have power and that they use it. The rest is just the boring details. The first living things to survive and to multiply managed to do both because they had the power to do them. Gradually, these organisms evolved, because those that, perchance, were able to serve themselves better as a result of minor genetic mutations, got to survive and to reproduce more successfully. Not long after this beginning of life, organism A and organism B saw something that they both wanted, and there just wasn't enough of it to go round to satisfy both parties. But organism A, who had the most power to get it, got it. He got the goodies. And so organism A, his friends, and his family flourished, while organism B and his did not. And that's how it has been ever since. Evolutionary success is essentially based on power. The power to deal successfully with those features of the environment, which includes other organisms, that need to be dealt with. Even higher organisms, including humans, with complex brains and sophisticated behaviors, seem also to be motivated primarily by the quest for power. The word power being applicable to an enormous range of their behaviors and their capabilities. Indeed, so enormous is this range that most of what humans say, think, and do seems to arise from their desire to acquire power and to use it. And this is not a trivial statement. It is worth contemplating. So I'll repeat it. Most, and I want to stress the word most, of what humans say, think and do seems to arise from their desire to acquire power and to use it. That's quite a grand statement. In short, it says that most of what you say, think and do is about power. And when you see this, and understand what it means, and what it implies, your understanding of the world in which you live begins to grow. The world makes much more sense to you than it ever did before. More of the pieces begin to fit into place. So, what I am going to do now is to give you some examples of a very wide range of human behaviors, and I am going to ask you to try to see these behaviors as an attempt to acquire power and/or to use it. And some of these examples might surprise you. These examples describe people doing certain things. And my contention is this: whether they realize it or not, and in most cases they do not realize it, at least consciously, people are mostly trying to acquire power and/or to use it. That's what they are doing. But in most cases, this is hidden from their conscious awareness by a complicated system of social and personal imperatives that operate in our brains. These imperatives end up somehow justifying or explaining what we are doing by pointing the finger elsewhere when it comes to our motives. But we will start by looking at an example that is not likely to be very contentious. And this is that we eat sugary things because we like the taste of them. As far as we are concerned, we eat sugary things simply because we like their taste. What else is there? Well, of course, the real reason that we like sugary things is because our biology knows that sugar is a good source of quickly manufactured energy. But that isn't what our biology tells our feeble consciousness system. For some reason, it doesn't bother to tell us about the fact that sugar is good for energy. No, not at all. It does nothing of the sort. Our biology simply makes us enjoy the taste of it. Wow, this tastes good, says our consciousness. I'll eat some more of this, thank you. In other words, our brains seem to send us to places and to make us like certain things without telling us why. The same goes for sex. Our brain doesn't bother to entice us into having sex by saying to our consciousness, "Sex is good for having lots of babies. Give it a try right now." That wouldn't get us into bed with anyone. If anything, we would probably say, "No thanks. Not today, thank you." And so, what our biology has done is to arrange matters so that having sex gives us a great feeling. And that's it. What else is needed to get our lazy backsides into the bedroom? And so, really, our brain does not tell us the truth about things, even simple things, like sugar. Your brain simply makes you feel good or bad, depending on what it reckons is good for you, or, more accurately, what it reckons is good for it. Not you, but it. And there's a difference. And you are to it, in other words, to your brain, as your computer screen is to your computer. You just don't realize it, as discussed in the first podcast of this series. And your brain wants power, just like organism A wanted power. And your brain will direct you to get this power in much the same way that it directs you to ingest sugar. It doesn't give you the complex details about sugar, it simply makes it taste good to you. Similarly, it won't give you the complex details about power. It will simply make power taste good to you. Okay, so let's start off with some of the wide-ranging examples of human beings seeking to acquire power and or to use it, in order to see just how central is power to understanding most, and I repeat, most, of what we say, think, and do. Example 1. Eating sugary things, or more generally, eating food, drinking water. Well, clearly, doing these things brings you power. And when you think of the amount of effort that we need to engage in, even today, in order to fill our tummies, cooking, shopping, washing up, excreting, earning money, and so on, you can see that already a significant percentage of our total daily activities has something to do with the acquiring of power, in this case in the form of calories, energy. The next example is example 2. Earning money. Earning money brings us power. And the more money you have, the more power you have. And the more power you have, the more money can you make, which can buy you more power. Indeed, power begets power. And so, human beings tend to like having lots of money, which is why so many people devote so much of their waking time to working for money. But power is what they are seeking. Power is what the people want, even though they themselves might not realize this. So here we have another major occupation that takes up a lot of time, earning money. And, once again, we find that it has something to do with the acquiring of power and or using it. For example 3, let's think about something not so obvious. Let's think about sports. People play sports for many reasons. Perhaps they like winning at sports, to enjoy that feeling of winning, a demonstration that they had more power than their opponents, and that they used this power well. That's enjoyable. Exerting power is enjoyable. But, of course, some people play sports mostly just to keep healthy, and or to commune with their sporty friends. Winning is not so important. And sometimes they don't play sports at all. They just watch them on the TV. But the quest for power is still there in all cases. Perhaps to develop the power of their bodies and their minds. Sometimes in order to beat their opponents. Perhaps to derive the power from having good friends as a result of playing sports with them, or from just watching sports on the TV and talking about this at work or in the pub. And so, for example, to have the power to go to the cinema with a friend or two, to watch a good film, and the power to not be alone when you do not feel like being alone. Sports can bring you friends, which brings you power. In other words, for the most part, interest in sports might have more of a social function than a physiological one. But whatever the case, one can see that there is a motive to acquire power and to use it that lies behind the interest in sports. Whether playing them in order to win, playing them in order to commune with like-minded friends, or watching them on the TV and talking to your friends about them later on. Indeed, what other motives could there be to have any interest in sports? Well, of course, you might say that sports can be just entertainment. Sitting back in your armchair, feet up, a cup of tea and sandwiches at hand, staring at the TV screen. Where's the power being acquired there, I hear you ask? Well, I have 4 points to make about this question. Firstly, as I said earlier, that most of what we say, think and do has something to do with power. And the reason that I said most rather than all is because it can be difficult to see how power can be acquired where little energy is being used. For example, when collapsed in front of the TV. But where more than a modicum of energy is being expended, this is where you will nearly always see a quest for power and/or the using of it, both of which are pleasurable. Secondly, part of your pleasure in being collapsed in front of the TV might well be down to the fact that you have the power to relax and to have some leisure time. I think I'll put my feet up and do nothing, except gawp at the TV with a long glass of beer. This is the life. In other words, in this particular instance, you are exerting power, the power to do what you feel like doing when you want to do it.
Remember, exerting power is pleasurable.
Thirdly, as was mentioned when talking about sugar, our brain doesn't really tell us why it wants us to do something. And so, for example, being collapsed in front of the TV, and enjoying it, may well have something to do with power in that you often need to relax, and even sleep, in order to be able to acquire and/or use power. You have got to rest, you have got to sleep, if you want to be able to exert power. And your brain knows this. And so your brain is likely to give you pleasure from engaging in both of these activities, rest or sleep. It's bedtime. I'm off for a lovely sleep. This is your brain maintaining your power. Fourthly, engaging in sports or watching them might well arise from the pleasures that were once derived from playing games as children. Human youngsters love games. It seems to be nature's way of introducing youngsters gently into the real world. They can practice skills and make mistakes without leading to real-life consequences. Games help youngsters to learn how to get power and to enjoy using it. Now, at this stage, you might well think that trying to account for nearly all forms of behavior in terms of power is just overstating the case, and losing a lot in the process. To which I would say to you this: if some suspect seems to keep cropping up again and again and again when you are investigating various crimes, you should look at him very closely. And power does keep cropping up. And if we can easily make power fit the facts, then, just like one of those physics equations that condenses all the findings into just one formula, we have discovered something worthwhile. In this case, the driving force behind most of what we say, think, and do. In other words, if we are able to link the quest for power to most of our activities without even having to delve into complicated theories, we are likely to be onto something. It's a bit like gravity in physics. It seems to crop up everywhere, in all sorts of important equations. The swinging of a pendulum, the attraction of different bodies to each other, the speed at which they will approach each other, and so on. And power is a bit like gravity in this respect, when it comes to biological and human endeavors. My next example, example 4, is this. Why does a baby cry? A baby cries to exert power over its mother. A woman cries to exert power over whoever happens to be observing her. They are not necessarily being consciously manipulative when they cry. It's just that nature gave their brains a way of signaling that they could do with a bit of help right now, and perhaps some sympathy. but power is the bottom line. They are trying to influence you with their tears. And even one-year-old babies seem to understand this, because there is some evidence to suggest that even one-year-olds can turn on the tears, not because they are feeling particularly bad, but because they want some attention. In other words, they are being manipulative. They are trying to influence you. And when you go over to comfort the aforementioned weeping individuals, you are attempting to influence them, to make them feel better. And, whether or not you are successful, you are still attempting to influence them. And influencing people or objects is a manifestation of power. And so, for example, you successfully comfort your missus when she is upset over something, and both of you get pleasure from it. You, because you managed to get her to feel better, in other words, you had power over her, and she, because she managed to get you to respond in a way that made her feel better. In other words, she had power over you. So it's win-win, which, in a nutshell, is what good relationships are all about. Empowering each other. Example 5 is me doing this podcast. I'm trying to influence you. Hence, I'm trying to exert some power over you. And influence equals power. I might not be consciously aware that acquiring power and exerting power is my aim. As far as I might be concerned, doing this podcast is just fun, for many reasons. I'm interested in the topics. I want to share my ideas with my friends, my fans, and my audience. I want to get better at using the software and the technology that allow me to create this podcast. I want to try to improve the speed at which I can both think and speak, the latter which I often find difficult to do unless I speak slowly and in short bursts. But all of these things can be seen as a quest for power, or as the exertion of power. The fact that my brain might not reveal this to my conscious mind is neither here nor there. Remember from the first podcast that our conscious mind has no awareness of the billions of neuronal firings that are taking place within the brain. Our consciousness is merely informed of the result of all those firings, these firings being based on our history, our learning, our culture, and our biology. And so my brain might tell me this: you are doing this podcast because you are such a nice fellow who likes to help people to understand the world. What a nice fellow I am, such a generous person with my time, such a philanthropist. This is what my neurons might tell my conscious thoughts about the reasons why I do my podcasts. You're such a good chap. But far more likely to be true is that, essentially, I am trying to acquire power and to exert power. My overall point is that whether you are looking at people who are engaging in sports, or crying, or eating sugary things, or resting or sleeping, trying to comfort someone, or making podcasts, a wide range of behaviors, power has something to do with it. And if you store the equation, influence equals power, firmly inside your head, and you make it readily and automatically available to your thinking apparatus, whenever you ask yourself why something is happening, my view is that you are far more likely to answer your question accurately than if you do not do this. In other words, keep remembering that influence equals power. And all of this goes back to organism A and organism B near the beginning of life on this planet, and to the principles involved in evolution itself. Thus, survival of the fittest can be loosely translated as the survival of those who have the most power when it comes to competing for resources and to surviving. It is a law of nature, biological nature, that is very close to being a law of physics, in that it is, in this case, so self-evident, which is why the theory of evolution itself is seen to be so fundamental to understanding life, all of life. And so it should not really be surprising to discover that the currently successful evolution of human beings is based mostly on their ability to acquire power and to exert power, and on their desire, evident or not, to do both these things. The quest and the desire for power are embedded into our brains from the very start, and they are just as important as our arms and our legs, which, by the way, were designed for the sole purpose of giving us power, and the power to exert our power. And if it was not for this, let's call it, urge to acquire power and to use it, we would be precious little more than baked beans. As such, one can assume, and with much justification, that human beings will actually gain some kind of pleasure from acquiring power and from exerting it, because creating pleasure is the way that brains get their owners to do things. No pleasure, no thanks. Conversely, losing some power, in other words, losing some of your ability to get what you want, whatever that might be, has a negative effect on you. It doesn't feel good. Indeed, many people will work 5 days a week in order to get some power. 5 days a week. That's how important it is. And when you start looking at the world in terms of how people are forever trying to shape the power landscape in order to benefit themselves, you really do get to see things that you have never seen before. You'll get to understand things that you never really understood before. Your social and psychological detectors and analyzers have all been sharpened and improved. You have updated some software in your brain and got a better, slicker version. It's like having an oracle to hand. It's like seeing a new color that you have never seen before. And you say, "My goodness, look at that new color. My world seems richer, more detailed. I can see more things, and so I have a better grip on what is going on out there. There is a new color that is outlining and detailing a shape that I just could not see before." It's like getting hold of a great new tool, a tool that you had in your pocket all the time, brought to you by courtesy of Charles Darwin and others. He spelled it out long ago. Power to get what it wants is the key to an organism's survival. This is how organism A survived, while organism B did not. We are organism A. It is we who made it to the top of the hill, for the moment, and loosely speaking, and it was our superior ability to get power on this planet that got us here. But, as we have seen, our brain does not reveal this so easily. It doesn't reveal it to others, and it doesn't reveal it to us. And being complex social animals, our relatively new brain, the cortex, also hides what we are up to when we are dealing with others. It creates huge complications that are designed to obfuscate our basic motives, the seeking of power, in order to deal with our fellow human beings in a more appropriate and less threatening way. And so, if you like, the truth is buried even deeper than it was before. For example, the connection of sugar to power is easy to see. The connection of crying to power is not so easy to see. And because we often need to justify ourselves to others, our brains have also had to create other types of confabulation in order to explain ourselves, and those confabulations convince us and others that they are true, or perhaps we often kind of know that they are not true in some cases, but we stop our minds from going there, if you see what I mean. It's all part of our social and personal camouflage, and we often do not want to admit even to ourselves who we really are. And so, for example, we comfort someone who looks miserable because we claim with great pride that we care for how they feel, and we want to help them to feel better. We're nice people. We are nice people. We do care how they feel, and we do want them to feel better. It's not a lie. It's not some underhand deceit. As far as we are concerned, we being the conscious we, what we think of as our real selves, if you like, the real we genuinely believes that we are good, caring people who just want to help others. But underneath this genuinely, consciously felt desire to help someone and to be kind and caring lies a more basic motive, the desire to influence them. In other words, to exert power over them. And this is why, for example, it is so frustrating for us when our efforts to comfort them fail. Indeed, in order to get some further insight into how important to us is this quest for power, we only have to look at how badly we feel when we lose power. Losing power has a terrible effect on us. Imagine, for example, the truly depressing situations that people often find themselves in when they are having continually to deal with people who deprive them of power. These situations are almost intolerable. A fairly good example would be perhaps where we find ourselves living with someone who denies us the ability to exercise the power that we would like to exercise. Perhaps a couple who live together, but whose relationship is deteriorating, and they are arguing all the time. It's nightmarish. Everything they do seems to annoy the other person. They daren't open their mouths, lest the other person reacts negatively towards them. They skirt around each other, trying to avoid each other's presence, but not too much, lest they cause some further conflict. It's a miserable situation, because the individuals concerned have lost so much of their power to speak openly, to have fun together, to have sex perhaps with them or with someone else, to go out together for a meal, to listen to the music that they want to hear, at the time that they want to hear it. On and on it goes. In short, one feels hemmed in and restricted. In other words, powerless, when one is having to live in such a precarious situation. And why is your partner, even in a great relationship, likely to get so upset if he or she espies you looking, let's say fondly, at someone else? Your jealousy buttons are pushed, and your day is ruined. Perhaps your whole relationship is ruined. Why? Well, it's because if your partner has an eye for someone else, you see yourself losing power over something that you really, really want, your partner. It can be devastating, because that power is hugely important to you. Your partner was going to affect your life positively in so many ways, and now you appear to have lost power over them. The fact that your partner continues to treat you exactly as he or she did before hardly makes any difference. It is the fact that you have discovered that someone else might have influence on them, which threatens your position of power over them, that is the real problem. And your biology doesn't like this, and so it causes you to feel jealous, so that you will be motivated to do something about it. And this can happen when a married couple or a couple have a baby. The mother often takes her focus away from the man, and the baby becomes her focus, the man suddenly loses a great deal of power over the woman that he cares for. Similarly, many people would also likely disapprove of their partners viewing porn, and they often disapprove of anybody looking at porn, their partners or otherwise. Why? Well, it's because they believe that they will lose power over them if their minds are attracted elsewhere, to other people and to other things. This applies to your partner and to the rest of the world, albeit to a much lesser extent. Indeed, those who want you to attend to their needs are often very keen to ensure that your sexual interests are curbed. Your partner wants your undivided attention and doesn't want you to see something of interest elsewhere. But the same is often true of the superorganisms. They want your undivided attention too, which is why many religions and often governments go to extraordinary lengths to denounce sex and to make it less available for people. And so women have to cover up in some places. There are rules and regulations as to what is permissible, with whom and when, and woe betide you if you don't stick to these rules. Of course, some of these rules might be very good ones, and worth having, like not having your 14-year-old daughter stay out too late with the boys. But at the end of the trail of those rules lies something or someone who wants to exert power over you. As another example, young women are well known for often being attracted more to the bad guys rather than to the nice guys. Why? It doesn't make any sense. Oh yes, it does. The bad guys are difficult to exert power over. That's what bad means in this context. And when a young woman gets hold of one, she is demonstrating to herself and to others that she has power. And she does. And she enjoys exercising that power. And in the exercising of it, and in the demonstrating of it, she acquires even more power. Power begets power. As she gets older and wiser and she becomes more interested in a more stable, longer-term commitment, she is more likely to go for the nice guy, because he is easier to control and she is more likely to get what she wants from him, and what she wants has changed. Indeed, the inordinate amount of time and effort that women devote to making themselves look attractive, in front of the mirror, in the bathroom, at the hairdresser, at the clothing stores and the shoe shops, well, it's all, or mostly, about acquiring power. And then, when she's on the dance floor, gyrating rhythmically, or walking down the street, knowing full well that her bits are bobbing seductively and in sight of passing strangers, she is enjoying the exercising of that power. And our parents drive us nuts when we become teenagers. We want to scream at them. Why? Because we want more power over our own lives. That's why. Our parents are too restrictive. And this is why prison is considered to be a good punishment. Prisoners lose their liberty. In other words, they lose the power to get many things that they want. And when, for example, we see people who have lost limbs, or who have problems with one of their senses, deaf, blind, we recognize with horror how debilitated they are. And by debilitated, we really mean that they have lost a great deal of power with which to deal with the world. Similarly, the older you get, the more does your body weaken, the less attractive do you become ill more often. As a result, the power that you have in so many areas decreases substantially. It gets you down. And some of your old friends and some of your family have died too, or moved away. No longer can you access them and talk to them at will. Your power to be with them is significantly reduced, especially if they are dead. You have many fewer options. You have a lot less power. This is why we are so scared of old age and horrible diseases. And we grieve in abject misery when someone who was close to us dies. Why? If we are atheists, then we believe that they are no longer suffering. They no longer exist. But if we are religious, should we not rejoice at their impending arrival at some place, heaven perhaps, that is full of joy? So why the grieving? Surely grieving, in most cases, can only make sense when we consider it with regard to our own self-interests. Well, I can't actually really figure this one out in terms of power, and not sure that I want to, but I have a horrible feeling that someone will manage to, because something to do with power, getting it or losing it, does seem to lie at the root of our emotions and our motives. And this is masked through a complicated system of confabulation. Our brains do not tell us the scientific facts, or even the biological facts, about why we should or should not do certain things. Our biology just pushes us toward them or away from them by a system of feelings. With our culture and our history often pointing us in different directions. For example, for some people, donuts are the best way to eat sugar. For others, it is chocolate. And in different parts of the world, people prefer different types of sugary things. Similarly, if you are a heterosexual man born in China, women who look Chinese look very sexy to you. But if you are born in Africa, then African women will be the ones that you go for. And I also feel certain that your own mother's shape, sound, and colour probably has something to do with it. And it is truly astonishing the extent to which our brains can reconstruct and reshape reality if it suits their purposes. For example, sex without some kind of psychological enrichment and confabulation would be a pretty rum affair, and quite revolting in many ways. Unwelcome gunge, horrible smells, stickiness, soreness, sweat, bacteria, bad breath, blood, the possibility of disease, infection, unwanted pregnancies. And yet there we are, made completely oblivious to all of this, as our minds transform our sexual partners into the irresistible objects of our lust. In short, our brains want us to want something, and they are going to construct our reality in a manner that is designed to encourage us to get it. And so, for example again, if we want that piece of fertile land over there, with that great water supply, but another tribe lives on it, then it won't be long before collectively our brains will tell us that those people on that land are nothing more than murderous subhuman savages who don't believe in our gods or our ways, and who must be out to destroy us, and that, as such, we are duty-bound to kill them. For the sake of our children, of course. Well, historians, philosophers, psychologists, and biologists have understood this sort of thing for a long time. So this notion that power is hugely important when it comes to human behavior is really nothing new. And politicians, public relations people, advertisers and marketeers, and keen business people know full well that power is the route to success. And professionals such as these also know how dirty and dishonest is the whole game when there is a lot of money and power at stake. It really is dirty. Indeed, I think that most people would be genuinely appalled if they realized just how corrupt are so many of those people with a lot of power. And the saddest part is this: the more corrupt they are, the higher do they fly, because the more honest folk haven't got a hope in hell of competing with them. But we don't often talk about this sort of thing in our newspapers or magazines, though increasingly so thanks to the internet. And we don't talk about it so much with our friends. It's kind of hidden from view, often by using other words to fill in the details. This morning, President Obama said he would do X in order to help Y. More accurately, however, President Obama said he would do X because telling the public that he would do X and perhaps doing X, would empower him in some way. That's why he said it. Similarly, this morning's newspapers are filled with stories about Incident Z, a hugely important issue. More accurately, however, the morning's newspapers are filled with these stories because the proprietors will sell more newspapers. In summary, the quest for power is the driving force for most of what you see going on around you. And if you take this on board while looking more closely at yourself and at others, my strong belief is that you will understand far more about yourself and about the world out there. And I really would like to stress that this is something that is well worth doing. In other words, you yourself will be very much empowered by doing this. Now, while I am sure that most of you will now understand what I am trying to say, there is a strong likelihood that you will soon forget about this podcast as your mind moves elsewhere. But I really would urge you to try to hold on to this notion that power lies at the root of so many things, because it really does open your eyes, in my view. It helps you to follow the trails and to understand why people or groups and superorganisms say what they say and do what they do. And you begin to realize that you are not fooling yourself by following these trails, because the connections and the destinations will so very, very often confirm that your view is correct, far more correct and informative than what appears on the surface. And in connection with the superorganisms that we have talked about, they are no different. They seek power. If they didn't want power and they didn't use it, they would never have become superorganisms. Take notice also of the fact that those individuals who rise to the top of the tree, the President, the Prime Minister, the CEO, these are the very people who have served themselves the best. They have played the system and they have gotten to the very top. These people are the kings of the power game. And they were promoted by the superorganisms that they serve precisely because these people were considered to be the most beneficial for them. It's not the love of money that is the root of all evil. It's the love of power. And often you will hear people say, follow the money, in order to direct your attention to who or what might be behind some activity. But really we should say, follow the power. Indeed, follow the money is a kind of left-wing way of pointing the finger at capitalist-oriented enterprises, which kind of makes people look away from the fact that government itself is seeking power. It's a way of masking the fact that the superorganism of government and the superorganism of some large capitalist profit-seeking enterprise are not really very different. And they're often the very same people who head them. And those who work inside government are no more honourable or moral than are those who work in the private sector. George Orwell studied for some 3 decades how different types of government operated, and one can summarize his findings as follows. They, governments, do not respond to fair play or to a sense of justice or honour. They will only respond to your requests if you threaten their power. In the next podcast, we will take a look at how superorganisms begin and at how they grow. And there are some rather surprising, eye-opening conclusions that one can draw from viewing the processes that are involved. Most of them fairly depressing, but there is some hope. And that, my dear friends, is the end of this podcast. Thank you for listening.